Sure.
So when he starts to talk to you about the lone gunman,
Mm-hmm.
you haven't rewatched the whole thing yet, right?
I have not. No, a lot of this is coming back to me because, like I said, I had 5 hours of sleep before this interview because I couldn't sleep.
Yeah, because you guys start talking about lone gunmen, and he asks you like what you think if there's ever been a proof of like an MK type person.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's interesting. I thought that was an interesting thing because I was thinking about this because he really comes out of a world where like that type of stuff was never ever talked about. And if it was done in like probably hushed quarters, but you're not discussing that on the news. You're not.
No, and I think Dick Carlson would have totally been like, that's retarded. So.
Yeah, and so I think about that because he does have guests on beside yourself who have alluded to that type of stuff, and that's always interesting because not only one in academia, or I mean, similar to the thing where these guys are getting butthurt about the Rosicrucians or something.
Yeah,
it's like. It's so weird that stuff exists and it's actually provable. But then you get a guy like him, and I remember back when the first time he went on Jones, like back in like 2012 or something.
Yep.
I mean, at least he was thoughtful enough to be able to go, see what he has to say. But you did see him start to take in like what Jones had said to him on that interview. And say like, that's weird because I am actually seeing these things play out in reality, and come to the conclusion that like news people are really cut off from like reality.
Yes.
To where they would never even entertain the idea of like there was a good part, like a lot of times people will just say like, okay, every single person is in on something.
Right.
Whatever the conspiracy of the day is. It's like all the news people have to be in on it too. It's like, actually they don't.
Right.
Because they don't live in a world where people even entertain that as a possibility. So.
Yeah, I think that one thing I noticed with this type of stuff, like, and I think I don't remember if I said this in the interview or if I said it to Tucker when we were just eating breakfast or whatever, but I think that like the level of the information when you, and I'm not trying to brag, but like if you read Brzezinski and Kissinger and Jacques Attali, and Klaus Schwab and David Rockefeller, and you when you read those types of texts and you read white papers, Rand Corporation stuff, you're reading at a level of a Brzezinski or a Kissinger, which is a very high type of level. So people that, for example, get like an international relations degree, they might read one or two of those texts, but they're not constantly reading those texts. So the type of discussion that you would get at that level back in the 1960s and 70s would be something that would be more like a classified, trilateral commission level discussion. It's not going to be the level of discussion even that bureaucrats or embassy heads or whatever, like those people are not reading at that level. They might have had some minimal exposure to that type of material. So what we're always trying to do is integrate a much larger scale type of stuff. Now when it comes to this, and I remember this point in the discussion because I imagine what was in Tucker's mind was Charlie Kirk. But when he asked about lone gunmen and stuff like that, my first thought was JFK and Sirhan, right? Just because I've not had the Kirk stuff on my mind lately. So I wasn't thinking about Charlie. He might have been thinking about Charlie Kirk when he mentioned it, but it seems like I remember him mentioning Sirhan to me. And I do think that if there were, so of all of these people that might have been a handled sort of person, I don't really think it would be Oswald. I think he was a patsy. I don't know exactly what went down with JFK, but I do think that there was a Middle Eastern, Israeli involvement. That's, I think, evident from James Jesus Angleton and the backdoor relationship that he had with Mossad that came out in the JFK files. That was my first thought when he asked that question, was to go to that. But he was probably thinking about Charlie Kirk and Tyler Robinson. My take on that, by the way, is, as I've been saying, I've never been convinced that there's significant evidence that there was no Tyler, trans group involvement. They were all bragging about it on Twitter and whatnot. My thought, and again, this is a theory, I can't prove this. I do think it's plausible that you could have these types of Discord groups used by other people, be it a foreign nation or whoever. But I can't prove that. So I don't have some hard set position on Tyler Robinson. And one reason for that was I felt like probably the trial would give a lot of information. I don't think Candace has been vindicated in her kind of all over the place theories. I think it's the evidence is pointing in the other direction. That evidence, however, does not prove or disprove other entities benefiting from it or being involved. But I can't prove that. So I think everybody sort of thinks that you have to immediately have some theory. And I know when I first started looking at like a lot of these big high profile events, I would fall into the same mistake of thinking that, oh, I need to immediately jump on the wave to have the first theory. And then you get everybody with their pet stupid theory about Charlie Kirk, and they're just doing that for the algorithm to get all this traction. So there's a lot of conspiratard stuff that I absolutely think is crazy about the Kirk stuff. I don't think there's tunnels or any of this exploding microphones. Like all this stuff is just silly to me. But I am not opposed to the idea that there are high profile foreign involvements. That's very possible. I cannot prove that though. So I think it's wise to hold off at times because guess what? In the past, I've jumped on high profile events thinking that I figured the whole thing out, and I was wrong. Now, I don't think I was wrong about a lot of them, but I think I've been wrong about some of them. I'm thinking back to like, I think I might have been wrong about there was an event where a Muslim dude attacked, what was that one? Chattanooga or Knoxville. People have already forgotten this one. And I think I probably got some things wrong about that one. That was like 10, 12 years ago. Nobody even remembers that one, and part of that has to do with like, I don't think all of the events are fake and staged. I do think there's a significant reality to Muslim people popping off. Now, that doesn't mean that those groups aren't handled by other types of groups, and we've actually seen that borne out. But I I did the exact same thing when I was kind of coming out of a lot of normie thought back in the 2000s when I started questioning the Big Nine event. My immediate thought was, well, the Muslims are all patsies. So Islam must be some tool that, or some scapegoat that isn't as bad as the West makes it out to be. That's when I'm talking about in the 2000s, right? But I didn't know anything about Islam. I didn't believe Islam. I was never interested or tempted to become a Muslim. I'm just saying, like, I did not studied it. I didn't know what the Quran really said. I knew that they taught, Jesus was a prophet. He wasn't divine. I knew they were anti-Trinitarian. I knew all that stuff. But what I'm saying is that I think Tucker's at that stage, which some people go through. I remember going through this thinking, oh, if 9/11 was not exactly what we were told, there's a lot of questions about it. Oh, then maybe the Muslims aren't as bad as we're told. I don't think that anymore. So I changed my position on that.
On the note, since you brought up Brzezinski, I mean, wouldn't you say that if you saw the Big Nine and then you went and read Grand Chessboard and or got a hold of the PNAC documents, that wouldn't be something that you could refer to in hindsight and say, oh, this seems to me like somebody's alluding to something that's going to come in the future?
You mean what specifically? What in the future?
Well, both PNAC and the Grand Chessboard allude to a Pearl Harbor type event that's going to happen.
No, that was some of the strongest things that convinced me that it wasn't true. 9/11, what we were told.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that's what. So I would say, but you wouldn't. But then I'm saying like you wouldn't necessarily qualify those statements as like people within the higher ranks having foreknowledge of something and maybe giving off a kind of, tipping their hand kind of thing.
No, I do. I think that people at that level had planned and did know what was going to happen on the Big Nine event. What I'm saying is that my initial thought after coming to believe the Big Nine event was an inside job or was arranged by that level of people was to then think, so then they're using Islam and Islam as a scapegoat. But what I'm saying is like that didn't make me pro-Islam, but I didn't realize Islam was as bad as it actually is. And I'm saying that you can have both of these positions be true. You can believe that Islam is a terrible, horrible cult that's being used to be imported into the West and believe that 9/11 was an inside job. I can believe both of those things. Why? Because Islam is not a single monolithic entity. There's a lot of sects, much like Protestantism, where these different groups and sects can be used by Western intelligence. And I think that's been proven now with Al Qaeda, with ISIS. Those are essentially Western proxies. I think that's 100% provable. So that's the explanation, but it's not all of Islam that's either good or bad, is what I'm trying to say. So to study Islam helps you understand, I think, how Islam can be bad and it can be used by intelligence agencies and be the patsy for the 9/11 event, because I think bin Laden was a cutout. I think he was always probably working for Western intelligence. So in other words, it's not mutually exclusive, but I think most people wouldn't be able to they wouldn't be able to say that Islam was used on 9/11 as a patsy and Islam's bad. It's like people are caught in dialectics of thinking, oh, I have to choose between Hamas or Zionism. No, they're both bad. Why can't I choose both of those as bad? Does that make sense? Do you guys understand what am I being too wordy? Am I not making?
No, I mean, you make sense to me. The point, I think one of the point I was drawing out of it was that it wouldn't I mean, there's a contingency now. Like if you look at the discussion, let's just say hypothetically around the Charlie Kirk thing, is that it's getting a lot harder to ask questions like, hey, I read this in the grand chessboard. Do you think that this is something that is foreshadowing what happened in hindsight, right? So it would be, that's not considered to be, in certain circles, that wouldn't be considered to be something that you would do in this particular case with Charlie Kirk. Like you're not, you see what I'm saying? Like if somebody says, points out that Harrison Smith had the text message that he had, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing happens in the text message. That's weird, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting piece of evidence that points in the direction of possible foreign involvement. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think people do go off the deep end. Obviously, the entire internet goes off the deep end with theories and all of that type of stuff. But just because people do that doesn't mean that something else isn't happening.
No, I was just using that. I agree. And I was just using it as an example to say that a lot of times it takes time for more information to come out to be able to substantiate what's probably the case, right? So like with JFK, a lot of people thought for a long time, Michael Collins Parker wrote, Final Judgment talking about Israeli angle and Israeli involvement, but there wasn't even better substantive evidence until the JFK files had multiple, files that discuss Angleton's relationship with the Mossad. That was crucial. So that helps substantiate that theory has credence to it, right? And I'm saying the same thing with people immediately saying, oh, I know what happened with Charlie Kirk and this. And I'm like, I don't know that you know that yet. Maybe that will be substantiated. And I'm just saying that a lot of the theories have not been substantiated. I think a lot of the evidence has pointed in against what Candace has argued. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not foreign involvement. I told you, John, you were in the chat group. I said right away, I was like, I think that certain foreign entities probably used these Discord trans groups, because that's a repeat pattern of people in Discord groups very easily being goaded into or prompted into these kinds of actions. It's also not even necessary to have that. I mean, there's enough people in the public that have been mind fucked with MK Ultra that you don't even need to have some handler managing an entire operation. However, with a high profile situation, I think you could have that. So I'm being very measured because I honestly can tell you I don't know. I was texting with Kurt Metzger for like 2 hours yesterday, and we were going back and forth about this because he's all on board with, like, Jimmy Dore and Candace type position. I'm like, look, that may be the case. I've not seen yet the substantive proof of that, and I don't think the trial is pointing that direction. And they'll say, well, but trials can be, mismanaged. Look at Alex Jones. I understand all that, but I'm just saying it's going to take time probably before I have a solid position. But I can tell you what my intuitions are, like the Harrison Smith text points to. That seems to be a plausible scenario to me. But I'm just saying I don't have 100% proof on that. I don't have 100% proof of exactly what went down on 9/11, but I don't believe the official story. And I think that the strongest evidence, here's another point I want to make too about this. People get all obsessed with 30-06 and bullets and physics. And dude, most of these people have no idea what ballistics physics. I don't know shit about that. People don't know about that. Yes, there might be some Green Beret Navy SEAL dude who knows about that. But between 10 different Navy SEAL Green Beret dudes' accounts of ballistics, how am I supposed to know which one of those is correct? I don't know. But I do know that Harrison Smith's text is a pretty interesting piece of evidence. I do know that Grand Chessboard is a great, prior to the Big 9 event, predictor or indicator of a Big 9 event. I know PNAC is a massive piece of evidence. I think those are very solid pieces of evidences. And getting lost. Remember at 9/11, everybody's getting lost in this debate over the physics of how fast a building collapses. Who the fuck knows about building collapse physics except people that work in demolition? Very few people. But I'm supposed to go read all of these reports, and NIST debunks it, but then they get debunked by these other people. I don't believe NIST, but I'm saying, like, the physics stuff is a distraction from, in terms of convincing people of the case. That's a huge, never-ending spiral. Like, who can actually engage with Richard Gage's crazy arguments about physics? I'm not saying he's crazy. I'm saying people debating about thermite and the chemical composition of the physics of thermite and the chemical, nobody knows that shit except for, like, minuscule experts. But what I do know is that Brzezinski's books point to foreknowledge and foreplanning. PNAC points to that. So I'm saying people lose sight of the real strong pieces of data and evidence, and they get hyper focused on stuff that will lead nowhere. That's what I'm trying to say. And then as soon as I say this, Dyer's trying to cover up for the ballistics proof that we have. Maybe you have it. I don't get why that's never going to prove anything to anybody. If you're going to prove it, it's going to be the Brzezinski type stuff, the PNAC type stuff. Not in court, but I'm saying proving it to, like, sensible people who will look at strong pieces of evidence. That's what I'm saying.
Well, the way the internet operates now is a result, and we talked about this years ago, not even in relation to anything currently happening, is the reason people think everything's fake or think they're, the average person now, whereas something we would have thought 20 years ago, when you're a newbie getting into conspiracy theories, the average person is capable of making those connections now in some capacity.
Right.
It might not be the correct thing. They might think UFOs are real, or, there's skinwalkers or whatever. I don't know. But the reason is because there was never answers given for anything in past days.
Well, another...
So when people start to see answers not being given, and just like especially in the Charlie Kirk thing, it's like
they're gonna jump on the first attempt at an explanation. Right.
I mean, it's not necessarily anybody's fault that you could pin it down to, but it's just like literally Trump has no interest in, like, the Charlie Kirk thing. Like, he never talks about it. He never even discusses his own attempt.
Dude, he addressed it in AI video, right? Wasn't he like an AI video when he addressed it?
Who?
Trump.
Oh, I don't know.
It was really, really weird.
Well, another thing too that I noticed is, so back when we were writing about a lot of this stuff, you know, in 2012, 13, 14 with Patrick Henningsen, and we covered a lot of these high profile events, Patrick always made this point, which I thought was very important at that time, that what everybody wanted and expected, what the system wanted at that time was trial by media, right? So mainstream media had a lot more power back in 2011, 12, 13. And so what they wanted was the ability to not go to trial and have this stuff like adjudicated in a court, because that's a lot more difficult to mess with or screw up than it is to do it through media. They wanted everybody to just accept the media's assessment. And one of the things that was very sus about a lot of high profile events was that the FBI would come in, they would immediately say it's a terror event, and then there's no more, you can't look into it. The FBI would basically classify the event. And so we could never know exactly what was going on. We just have to go by the narrative that,
And
you
they
know,
literally tell us to stop asking questions.
right. And that makes people more suspicious. And now what I think is happening is, because mainstream media has basically lost a lot of its power, now they want trial by social media mob. And so everybody can just then have the most popular theory, and that's supposed to be the thing that convicts people. Well, that's not how our system works. You're not convicted by either mass media or by social media mob. I mean, when I see the retarded shit people say about me, I don't want these people convicting me of something based on the theory. Like, they go to me being in a silly joke picture with Wicca phase, and they say that I'm a Satanist because we stood in front of a B movie set, and that's supposed to be proof that I'm a
He makes
Satan.
good music. He's all right. He's good.